Welcome. You're not here by chance. This channel is a place where history finds its voice. And you just close your eyes. Let the night wrap around you like a forgotten story. In the 19th century, Benjamin Disraeli posed a question that remains relevant today. Are we apes or angels? From a scientific standpoint, the answer is clear: we are primates. Our anatomy, neurology, and genetics all support this. Just watch chimpanzees at the zoo, and the similarities are undeniable. But let's look deeper. Yes, we are primates, but we are also something more. We are the first species capable of shaping our own destiny. Any monkey can grab a banana, but only a human can reach the stars. We probe the secrets of the Big Bang, explore the infinity of, and most paradoxically, we study our own brains. Think about it. A 1.5 kilogram mass made of stardust is able to contemplate the stars that created it. Our brain doesn't just think, it knows that it's thinking. With the emergence of humans, the universe became self-aware. But how well do we understand how our brain works? Take Lindsay. Every time she looks at numbers, they appear in bright colors. The number 5 is always red, and 3 is always blue. This phenomenon is called synesthesia, and among artists and writers, it's 8 times more common than in the general population. Now meet Derek. He lost his arm in a terrible accident, but his brain refused to accept it. When Derek shaves the left side of his face, he feels the razor sliding over an arm that no longer exists. When someone touches his cheek with a cotton swab, he feels it on his phantom hand. Even after amputation, the hand lives on in his mind. At the University of Toronto, neuroscientists discovered a strange phenomenon. During brain surgery, they found a neuron that responded not only to the patient's own pain, but also to the sight of someone else being pricked with a needle. This tiny neuron didn't seem to distinguish between self and other. It reacted to someone else's pain, just like it did to the patient's own. Some people have a rare gift. They see numbers arranged in space. For them, the numbers from 1 to 60 form a complex three-dimensional spiral that helps them with calculations. Interestingly, Einstein reportedly perceived numbers in a similar way. Then there's David. He believes his parents are imposters. He says the people in his home look like his parents, but are actually strangers pretending to be them. But when his father calls on the phone, David instantly returns to normal, engaging in a coherent conversation. And just as quickly, he slips back into the delusion when he sees his father in person. Each of these stories is like a puzzle piece. Together, they help us understand how the brain works, how it creates consciousness, and what makes us human. These stories raise more questions than they answer, but that's exactly what makes them so fascinating. Which brings us to the bigger question: how did our brain come to be? Its evolutionary story is as curious as these people's stories. Not long ago, just 15,000 years ago, our brothers lived on the island of Flores. They were only 90 centimeters tall, with brains the size of a chimpanzee's. Scientists call them Homo floresiensis, but everyone knows them as hobbits. These little people hunted giant rats and dwarf elephants, made tools, and swam in open water. They lived alongside our ancestors, but eventually disappeared. Perhaps we were the reason. Neanderthals were even more like us. They created art, wore jewelry, and buried their dead. They had complex language and rich culture, but they too vanished around 30,000 years ago. Why? Were we stronger? Luckier? Or could they have reached the same heights traveling to the moon, building computers, decoding their genome? Where did our uniqueness come from? Many people assume gradual change brings gradual results. But in nature, change is often nonlinear. Small shifts can lead to radical outcomes. Here's a simple example. Imagine you're slowly heating a piece of ice, 10°C -9, -8. For a long time, nothing happens. But as soon as it hits 0, everything changes. The ice turns to water. A 1-degree change transforms the entire structure of matter. This is called a phase transition. Our brain developed in a similar way. For millions of years, evolution made tiny adjustments, a few more neurons here, a slightly thicker nerve bundle there. Our ancestors became a bit more skillful, a bit better at understanding animal behavior, a bit more accurate at remembering the past. And then, about 150,000 years ago, an explosion occurred. Like water turning to ice, our brain entered a new state. Language emerged. Art, religion, self-awareness. In just 30,000 years, we learned to sew clothes, make jewelry, paint cave walls, and build musical instruments. A new evolution had begun, not genetic, but cultural. We still know very little about the human brain, but even this knowledge is more gripping than any detective story. When it comes to the brain, reality often turns out to be stranger than any fiction. In the next hour, you'll learn why someone might want to amputate a healthy arm, how a colorblind person can see impossible colors, whether it's possible to laugh from pain, how an autistic girl painted better than Da Vinci, whether turning off part of your brain can make you a genius, and what it feels like to believe that you are dead. This is a lecture about the mysteries of the brain. Close your eyes, feel your body relax, and join me on this fascinating journey. Because when we think about the brain, it's as if we're looking into the mirror of our very essence and learning to understand who we are. In the neurology of the last century, there were so many mysteries that doctors often needed the deductive powers of Sherlock Holmes. Patients with seizures saw God, some didn't recognize their own hands, and people with anorexia, though emaciated, saw themselves as fat in the mirror. For 100 years, it's been known that some people continue to feel a limb after it's been amputated. Many could even move. The missing arm waved goodbye or reach for the phone. They understood the arm was gone, but the sensations were real. Normally, the parietal lobes compare brain commands with actual arm movements and correct them. When you hit the like button and subscribe to a channel, it's this system that ensures your motions are precise and accurate. After amputation, the brain's command centers still think the arm is there and keep working. But since no real signals from the limb come back to contradict the commands, the brain interprets the phantom commands as real movements. The strangest thing, though, is that some patients reported their phantom limbs were paralyzed. Ramachandran studied their medical histories and found a key detail. Before amputation, the limb had been paralyzed due to nerve damage. This led him to the idea of learned paralysis. When the arm was paralyzed, the brain kept sending commands to move. It but got no response. The brain is capable of learning by strengthening or weakening connections between neurons. If event A consistently leads to event B, the connection between those neurons is reinforced. In the case of paralysis, the commands never produced movement, so those neural pathways gradually died off. The brain learned the paralysis, and after the arm was amputated, that learned paralysis transferred to the phantom limb. To test this theory, Ramachandran built a simple device, a mirror box. If you place both arms on either side of the mirror, it creates the illusion that you can see both hands, even though one is just a reflection. For a healthy person, it's a fun visual trick. But for patients with phantom limbs, this invention turned out to be a gift of fate. The first person to try it was a patient named Jimmy. His right arm was intact, but in place of his left arm, he had a painful phantom he couldn't control. When Jimmy looked into the mirror and began moving his healthy hand, something miraculous happened. He felt like he could control the phantom, and the pain began to subside. In some cases, the phantom limb disappears completely along with the pain. Faced with conflicting signals, the brain simply gives up and stops believing the arm exists. Other scientists replicated the experiment and confirmed its effectiveness. This became the first successful amputation of a phantom limb in history. No one doubted anymore how deeply connected our mind and body are within the brain. In the 1980s, scientists viewed the brain as a set of specialized blocks with clearly defined functions, hardwired from birth. Textbooks depicted it as a simple diagram of boxes and arrows. But in the 1990s, this picture began to change. The brain turned out to be much more complex. It became clear that different brain regions don't work in isolation, they constantly interact. Changes in one area caused by injury or learning can significantly affect others. Even more surprising, one area can take over the function of another. The brain is uniquely flexible. And that's not just true for children, it applies to adults. 2. It constantly adapts to changes around us. But what does brain plasticity have to do with human uniqueness? After all, monkeys can have phantom limbs too, and their brains also adapt after injuries. What makes us special? The key lies in the fact that it's not just our genes, it's our plasticity that played a crucial role in human evolution. We could just as well call ourselves Homo plasticus. While the brains of other animals merely demonstrate flexibility, we are the only species that uses it as the primary means of enhancing our minds and evolving. A long childhood plays a major role in this. We remain dependent on adults and highly adaptable to learning for over 10 years. This period lays the foundation for the development of the adult mind, though plasticity continues throughout life. Without this trait, we'd still be ordinary apes roaming the savannah. There would be no fire, no writing, no dreams of the stars. It was brain plasticity that allowed us to become who we are. Laughter and humor are extraordinary things. They exist in every culture, but only in humans. Apes may respond to tickling with sounds resembling laughter, but they won't laugh if someone slips on a banana peel. In his book, The Telltale Brain, Vilayana Ramachandran recalls an unusual case from his student days. He examined a patient named Mihi. During the exam, he pricked her neck with a needle, but instead of flinching in pain, Mihi laughed and said it tickled. Years later, Ramachandran met another patient named Dorothy, who showed the same strange symptom. Research revealed that one of the brain's pain pathways was damaged. Normally, pain perception has two stages. First, the brain registers the sensation. Then the signal is sent to the anterior cingulate cortex, where feelings of fear and suffering arise. But in Mihi and Dorothy, this second stage was impaired. Pain was felt, but without anxiety. The brain seemed to say, "It's fine," and laughter followed. This helped reveal a key principle of humor. We expect something serious or dangerous, but then suddenly realize there's nothing to fear. For example, someone thinks a glass door is closed, tries to open it, and falls. If they're hurt, no one laughs. But if they get up unharmed, people, especially those who saw it, laugh. Laughter signals no danger. The same happens with tickling. An adult approaches a child with a threatening face. Instinct says, danger. But instead of pain, the touch is light and playful. The child laughs. Even smiling may come from these ancient instincts. Among monkeys, baring teeth is a threat. But when greeting a friend, the grimace softens into a friendly signal. Mihi and Dorothy's cases showed that laughter likely evolved as a way to cope with fear and bond with others. Nature transformed alarm signals into a tool for communication. Vision also holds keys to understanding ourselves. Take eyes, for example. They evolved independently in different species. The octopus's eyes are remarkably similar to ours, even though our last common ancestor likely lived hundreds of millions of years ago and was blind. But we don't see with our eyes, we see with our brains. And it's the brain that makes human vision unique. Ancient ancestors had about 12 visual zones, like most animals. But when they moved to daytime life in the trees, everything changed. To grasp branches and find fruit among leaves, they had to distinguish colors. The number of visual areas increased to 30. The development of precise hand movements, especially the ability to oppose the thumb, had an equally profound effect on the brain. It allowed not just gathering food, but making tools, writing, counting, and building civilization. But the most remarkable thing is imagination. Dolphins or dogs might imagine specific images, but only humans combine them to create things that have never existed. In Cambridge, Ramachandran met Philip. After an accident and coma, Philip lost the ability to recognize faces. His vision worked. He could recognize houses, walk streets. But when he saw a face, even a photo, he became confused. We often think of vision as something simple. Look, understand. But behind that lie 30 brain regions working together. Think about how you perceive an image. It seems like your eye forms a picture, which is projected into the brain, where an inner observer looks at it. But then who watches inside that observer's head? And so on endlessly. This is a logical fallacy called the homunculus problem. In reality, light becomes signals. Not an image, but a coded description for the brain. Processing starts in the retina and travels through multiple regions. We become conscious of the result, recognizing an object only at the end. The process is fully automatic. For example, Swiss scientist Necker once looked at a crystal through a microscope and suddenly saw it flip. The crystal hadn't moved. Later, he drew a cube and again saw his perception shift. The brain switched between two interpretations, but couldn't see both at once. Or take the Ames room. One corner is stretched with a higher ceiling, but from a certain angle, the room looks normal, only the people inside appear oddly large or small. Again, it's the brain at work. Now look at an image with circular shapes. Do you see bulges or indentations? The brain can switch, but not perceive both at once. Ramachandran noticed that perception changes depending on the brain's assumption about the light source. Our brain automatically assumes light comes from above because for millions of years it lived under the sun. If a circle is lighter on top, it looks convex. Darker on top, concave. Try to see it the other way, it's hard. Tilt your head and perception shifts. The brain can no longer switch. It picks one version. This shows that perception depends not on the real position of the light, but on the orientation of our head. The brain seems to believe the sun is fixed to our scalp. Evolution built this system because our ancestors rarely walked with tilted heads. It was simpler for the brain to assume the light always comes from above. The primary purpose of vision isn't to be perfect. It just needs to work well enough and fast enough to help us survive and pass on our genes. Our perception isn't a mirror. It's not an accurate reflection of reality. It's more like the calm, quiet work of the brain, creating meaning from what we see. For Lindsay, for example, every letter has a color. Not a literal color on a screen, but an internal, subtle hue that appears every time she looks at text. Emma sees numbers in color too, even if they're printed in plain black ink. In her mind, they're still colored. What's more, the taste of food also has colors for her, each with its own shape and shade. A phone number? It's not just digits, it's a colorful melody. And every number has a personality of its own. In the telltale brain, Ramachandran recalls even more astonishing cases. One woman sees music, each note on the piano is shaded in a different color. Another feels emotions through touch. Denim fabric makes her sad. Silk brings a sense of calm. Even different grades of sandpaper evoke specific emotional tones like guilt or something akin to a small white lie. These people are perfectly healthy. Their perception is just a little different. They are synesthetes people whose senses are interwoven. Some can taste colors. Others hear shapes. Still others feel touch as emotion, and such people are all around us. In a previous lecture on neuroplasticity, I mentioned synesthesia. In the comments, dozens of viewers shared that they experience it too. One person wrote, "To me, the number 2 feels smooth, and Monday is blue." Some see music in color. Others associate letters with movement. Still others give numbers personalities. 1 is cheerful, 2 is shy, and so on. The most common form of synesthesia, as Ramachandran confirms, is color-based, where numbers are internally illuminated with color. Why does synesthesia exist at all? In our brain, there's a region responsible for processing color. Right next to it is the area that processes numbers. This observation once led neuroscientist V's Ramachandran to a curious idea. Perhaps synesthesia arises because signals cross over between these neighboring brain areas. It echoes an old debate about how the brain is organized. Some scientists once believed that each function is strictly localized. Others thought the brain works as a unified whole. As it often turns out, the truth lies somewhere in between. Simple functions like coughing or blinking are indeed controlled locally. But more complex actions like cooking or solving problems involve multiple brain regions at once. When we perceive the world, motion, color, and shape are processed in different regions. Synesthesia, Ramachandran suggests, may result from boundaries between these areas being slightly shifted. As a result, seemingly unrelated experiences like numbers and colors are perceived as a single whole. In early childhood, the brain forms a vast number of neural connections. After age 2, many of them die off a natural process. But in synesthetes, some of those extra connections may remain. That's why they continue to sense that each number has a color, or that sounds evoke visual images. Interestingly, synesthesia can also appear under the influence of certain perception-altering substances. Of course, these don't create new neural pathways, but they can temporarily enhance the ones that already exist. This suggests that synesthetic connections may be present in all people, but are usually suppressed. In synesthetes, the mechanisms that suppress cross-activation may be weaker, so the senses begin to intertwine. There are even cases where people temporarily lost their synesthesia after taking certain medications. One woman, for example, chose to stop treatment because without her unusual perceptions, the world seemed dull and lifeless. That's why scientists today prefer not to speak of confused senses, but of cross-activation in the typical brain. Neighboring areas tend to inhibit each other to avoid interference. In synesthetes, this balance is disrupted, allowing one region to activate another. One of the most astonishing cases of synesthesia involves a man named Spike Jahan. He told Ramachandran that he saw numbers in color which didn't seem remarkable, until it was revealed that Spike was colorblind. His eyes couldn't detect certain hues, yet he still saw the colors of numbers. He described them as Martian strange, unfamiliar tones that don't exist in real life. This shows that color perception isn't just a function of the eyes, it's a complex process in the brain. Even if the eyes can't register a color, the brain can still create it. Imagine looking at a number and seeing a color you've never encountered in the real world. It's like trying to explain the color blue to someone born blind. Experiences like that make us wonder, can we ever truly understand how someone else feels? Perhaps studying synesthesia will bring us closer to that answer. Synesthesia is often found in creative people. The painter Kandinsky, writer Nabokov, and composer Liszt all reportedly had this trait. It's said that Liszt once asked an orchestra to play a little more blue. Roughly a third of people in creative fields report similar sensations. Maybe they just have vivid imaginations. Or maybe they're more comfortable expressing their feelings. One hypothesis is that synesthesia helps form metaphors. For example, when Shakespeare writes, "Juliet is the sun," we don't take it literally. We understand she is warm, bright, and lights up the world. Our brains rapidly connect abstract ideas across domains. Synesthetes do the same thing, but at the level of perception. They link shape and taste, sound and color, scent and number. This might not be a defect, but a gift. Interestingly, people with damage to certain brain areas lose the ability to understand metaphors. They interpret everything literally. A phrase like "all that glitters is not gold" becomes, for them, a comment strictly about metals. This suggests that metaphorical thinking isn't just poetic, it's a vital part of how we perceive the world. So maybe it's not creativity that leads to synesthesia, but synesthesia that helps people think more creatively. Though, of course, that alone isn't enough to make someone an artist. You still need skills, experience, and the desire to learn. Sometimes nature preserves strange traits in people because they're useful. For example, in Africa, there's a gene that causes dangerous anemia if inherited from both parents. But if you have just one copy, it protects you from malaria. A harmful trait in one context can be beneficial in another. Perhaps synesthesia is no exception. Genes that foster cross-wiring of the senses might make our species more creative. Overall, most synesthetes don't see it as a problem. On the contrary, they often say they wouldn't want to lose this trait, and finally synesthesia may be present in all of us. Want to test it? Look at two shapes. One is a soft, rounded blob. The other is a sharp spike. Which one would you call Booba, and which one Kiki? Almost everyone answers the same way, regardless of language. That means our brains naturally link sounds with shapes. Synesthesia activates some brain regions and bypasses others. And perhaps that's what helps us not only perceive the world, but to dream, to feel, to create, and to express who we are. In 1999, Ramachandran encountered an unusual patient, Dr. Hamdi, a chemistry professor. He had suffered a head injury and a stroke, which damaged the left hemisphere of his brain. The right side of his body was paralyzed. But what bothered him most was the loss of his ability to speak freely. Even a simple request like asking for water took immense effort. He had developed Broca's aphasia, a speech disorder caused by damage to the left frontal lobe. Dr. Hamdi tried to explain his condition by moving his lips. His thoughts were clear, but the words wouldn't come. He could solve basic math problems and understand complex sentences, but struggled with more advanced algebra. This led Ramachandran to a thought. Perhaps the damaged brain area was responsible not only for building sentences, but also for other formal systems, like mathematics. In everyday speech, we constantly embed one phrase within another. For example, I told my friends the story I heard from you contains an embedded clause. This is how we make language more complex. Dr. Hamdi had lost that ability when Ramachandran asked him to write about how he ended up in the hospital. His text lacked conjunctions just like his spoken speech. Then Ramachandran asked him to sing the song, Happy Birthday to You. Dr. Hamdi performed it flawlessly, both melody and words. This showed the problem wasn't in the muscles used for speech. What was impaired was the command of language itself, the ability to construct grammatically correct sentences. When we say a simple word like rose, it can trigger a flood of associations. A first gift, a sweet scent, blooming gardens, or the heroine from Titanic. It seems like such associations would require the whole brain. But patients like Hamdi show otherwise. Grammar is managed by Broca's area and meaning by Wernicke's area. When Broca's area is damaged, a person speaks in short, simple phrases like Tarzan but still conveys meaning. When Wernicke's area is damaged, the speech sounds grammatically correct but lacks sense. How did such a complex system evolve in our ancestors? And how is it related to consciousness? Human language began with simple sounds, similar to those made by modern monkeys. But about 100,000 years ago, there was a leap. Our brains began to handle complex thought and speech. Scientists are still trying to understand how this happened. Since there must have been some intermediate stage, it's important to remember that language is more than a communication tool. For example, vervet monkeys have 3 distinct danger calls, one for leopards, one for snakes, and one for eagles. Each call triggers a specific behavior in other monkeys. But these are warning signals, not words. Human language is unique. By the age of 8, a child knows 100 times more words than a monkey does in a lifetime. The chimpanzee Washoe learned around 200 words in sign language, but that doesn't even come close. What truly sets us apart is the invention of function words. If and then exist only in human speech. Only humans can build complex sentences by embedding clauses. We can talk about the past, the future, and only humans can call the Taj Mahal a teardrop on the cheek of time. The origin of language remains a mystery. We understand how the giraffe's long neck evolved. Those with longer necks reached more leaves and passed on their genes. But how could language evolve with its many interdependent parts needing to work together? There are several theories. Alfred Wallace, Darwin's contemporary, believed language was too complex for natural selection and must have been created by God. Noam Chomsky proposed that language emerged spontaneously, like a new property in a complex system, just as sodium and chlorine combined to form edible salt. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. Stephen Jay Gould believed language was a byproduct of developing cognition. Steven Pinker argues that it is an innate instinct evolved specifically for communication. Ramachandran finds the first 2 theories untestable. He sees value in Gould's and Pinker's ideas, but believes they fall short of a full explanation. He offers another perspective, that language emerged from a fortunate combination of various brain abilities originally developed for different tasks. Asking what matters more, genes or environment, is like asking what gives salt its saltiness, sodium or chlorine. Language emerges from the interaction of innate capacities and external experience. The real question isn't whether language is innate, but how the ability to rapidly acquire it evolved. How did we move from monkey sounds to Shakespeare's poetry? Consider the Booba and Kiki experiment. Could this hold the key to the first words? Many linguists think words arose randomly. People sitting around a fire simply agreed on names for things. But that's naive. In the language of the Peruvian Huambaza tribe, there are different words for birds and fish. If you give these words to someone unfamiliar with the language, they can often sort them correctly. The sound of the word somehow reflects the shape of what it describes. It's also fascinating how movement is linked to speech. Darwin noted that when we use scissors, we often move our jaw unintentionally. The brain areas responsible for hand and mouth movements are located close together. Watch how we say, "Come here." We make a beckoning gesture with the hand, and the mouth echoes that inward motion. When we say, "Go away," our lips push outward, as if repelling. Perhaps gesture-based communication gradually transformed into speech. Hand movements became movements of the lips and tongue. Of course, languages have changed drastically over time. Sometimes 200 years is enough to make a language unrecognizable to its ancestors. But this ancient link between gesture and sound may have been the seed from which human language grew. In the brains of our ancestors, three crucial connections began to form. The first connection linked visual images with sounds, like in the Buba and Kiki experiment. The second connected sounds with mouth movements, and the third linked mouth movements with gestures. Each of these connections might have been weak on its own, but together they reinforced one another like a snowball gathering momentum. Gradually, this could have led to the emergence of true language. This is supported by studies of monkey brains. They have mirror neurons that fire both when the monkey reaches for a nut and when it sees another monkey do the same. These neurons seem to understand the intentions of others. This very ability to see the commonalities between different things is the foundation of abstract thinking. It sounds simple, but it's what made us human. In humans, the left inferior parietal lobe developed especially rapidly. Two new structures emerged in this area, the angular gyrus and the supramarginal gyrus. We have both in both hemispheres of the brain, and they evolved to handle two different kinds of abstraction. The right hemisphere specializes in spatial and bodily abstraction, while the left focuses on linguistic abstraction, wordplay, and puns. The upper part of this region, the supramarginal gyrus, exists only in humans. If it is damaged, a strange condition occurs. A person can still speak and think, but cannot mimic even a simple action. If you ask them to show how to hammer a nail, they will just strike the table with their fist. They understand the action, but cannot form a mental image and convert it into movement. People with this kind of damage can't judge whether others are performing actions correctly. They struggle to imitate new gestures and fail to notice their own mistakes. All these abilities are tied to mirror neurons. It is believed that the inferior parietal lobe originally developed in primates to help them jump between tree branches, precisely coordinating vision and movement. Later, due to gene duplication, this area split into two parts. The upper part continued to manage movement coordination, but now at a new level, for example, using tools. The lower part acquired the ability to find patterns and similarities between different things. Grammar likely emerged from this as well. Even a simple action like smashing a coconut with a rock resembles sentence structure. There's a subject, a verb, and an object. When our ancestors began making compound tools, it might have laid the groundwork for complex sentences where one idea is embedded inside another. Interestingly, something similar happened with the evolution of hearing. Our reptilian ancestors had 3 jaw bones, allowing them to swallow large prey. As they evolved into mammals and began chewing, 2 of these bones transformed into the middle ear bones. They were already good at transmitting ground vibrations and were simply repurposed to transmit sound. Language might have evolved the same way as a lucky combination of brain functions that originally served other purposes. Unfortunately, language doesn't fossilize, so we can only make educated guesses about its origins. Art is the fulfillment of our desire to find ourselves within the phenomena of the external world. Richard Wagner there is enormous artistic diversity on Earth, from ancient Greek statues to Tibetan Thangka paintings, from African masks to Impressionist art. At first glance, science and art seem incompatible. Science seeks patterns, while art seeks uniqueness. But is that really true? Many aesthetic principles are shared with other animals. We enjoy flowers even though they evolved for bees. We find a peacock's tail beautiful even though it's designed to attract peahens. In Australia, male bowerbirds decorate their nests with flowers and shiny objects. If you remove an item, the bird will quickly put it back. Similar principles operate in human culture. Consider a 12th century bronze statue of the goddess Parvati. To Indians, it embodies grace. But to the Victorians, it seemed strange: large breasts, wide hips, and impossibly narrow waist. They dismissed it as primitive, simply because they compared it to classical Greek sculpture. But art is not about copying reality. Taking a photo of a cat is not art. But random distortion isn't art either. There are certain laws of distortion that work across cultures. Brain research allowed V.S. Ramachandran to identify 9 universal principles of aesthetics. They are like recipes that artists use to create images, and sometimes those images affect the brain more strongly than reality itself. The first principle is grouping. In the early 20th century, psychologists discovered that the brain enjoys organizing similar elements into a whole, and this brings pleasure. If you're shown 2 sets of shapes, you'll almost always prefer the one with more order. Or take an image that first looks like chaos, but then suddenly a Dalmatian dog appears. The brain gets excited. I figured it out. Artists use this trick all the time. For example, in Madonna of the Meadow, Raphael uses similar shades of blue in the sky and Mary's clothing. Botticelli does the same in Primavera, linking the blue background with the dress. The same applies to fashion: red scarf plus red skirt. This harmony ties back to ancient instincts, spotting a predator by the pattern of its fur in the leaves. The eye detects repeating elements and unifies them. Artists exploit this and trigger the deep prehistoric response. The second principle is peak shift. This is the brain's response to exaggeration. In experiments, rats were shown a rectangle and a square. Choosing the rectangle earned them a reward. Later, they were shown an even more elongated rectangle, and the rats preferred it. The brain grasped the concept and craved more of it. That's why caricatures seem more recognizable than real faces. The features are amplified, and the face becomes more itself. The same idea is in the statue of Parvati. The feminine forms are exaggerated with a distinct curve to the body. Anatomically impossible, but visually striking, this also works in nature. Biologist Nico Tinbergen noticed that gull chicks peck at a red dot on their mother's beak. When shown a stick with a red dot, they did the same. If the stick was longer and had multiple dots, the reaction intensified. This helps explain the impact of abstract art. Picasso and Henry Moore created forms that excite the brain's neurons more than real objects. The Impressionists did the same with color. That's why Van Gogh and Monet lose much of their power in black and white. Their strength lies not in form, but in color. Now imagine white paint on a white canvas. Is that art? Some would say yes. And indeed, modern art has taken on even stranger forms. In 1936, artist Merritt Oppenheim covered a teacup with gazelle fur. A simple cup suddenly furry. It's disorienting. A cup is supposed to be hard and cool. Fur is soft and warm. Together, they create a feeling of discomfort, of oddness. That's the effect. The next principle is isolation. Why can a simple pencil sketch impress more than a detailed photograph? Because the artist removes the unnecessary. What's left is the essence. The brain finds it easier to focus. Even with billions of neurons, it cannot process everything at once. Ramachandran found support for this in children's drawings. He compared 3 horse drawings, one by a 7-year-old autistic girl, one by Leonardo da Vinci, and one by an average child. Viewers most often chose the autistic girl's drawing as the best. A paradox? How could a child who struggles with speech draw more convincingly than Leonardo? Perhaps because she intuitively applied isolation, removing everything unnecessary and leaving the core. And the brain senses that. This girl's name was Nadia. She was born in 1967 in Nottingham, England. From birth, a part of her brain responsible for speech and communication was damaged. Nadia hardly spoke, had difficulty understanding others, and seemed immersed in her own world. But at the age of 3.5, a miracle happened. She began to draw. Her drawings amazed people with their accuracy and skill. Nadia especially loved to depict horses and roosters, even though she rarely saw them. She drew from memory quickly and confidently, and could sketch a horse's head in just 2 minutes. At age 5, doctors diagnosed her with autism and developmental delay. Nadia could barely speak and struggled with simple tasks, but her drawings were compared to the works of Leonardo da Vinci. She intuitively understood perspective and proportions that other children learn over many years. Scientists believe that a healthy part of her right parietal lobe, the area responsible for artistic ability, remained intact. Since other brain regions weren't functioning properly, her attention focused there. Because of this, Nadia could capture and express the essence of an image. Interestingly, as she grew older and her autism symptoms lessened, her artistic talent faded. Similar phenomena have been observed in adults. Dr. Steve Miller studied patients with dementia and found that some unexpectedly began drawing beautifully. Brain scans showed that as the disease damaged the frontal and temporal lobes, the parietal lobe became more active, the area linked to visual and artistic perception. Physicist Alan Snyder proposed that temporarily shutting down certain parts of the brain might unlock hidden abilities. Surprisingly, this hypothesis was confirmed. In experiments using magnetic brain stimulation, ordinary students began drawing better and solving complex problems. There's a curious paradox in how we perceive beauty. We tend to prefer partially hidden objects over fully revealed ones. This is known as the peekaboo principle. Like the children's game, the brain loves solving puzzles. When we find the solution, whether it's a crossword or a hidden figure, we get a burst of pleasure, that aha moment. But the brain dislikes suspicious coincidences. For example, a palm tree perfectly aligned between 2 hills might only be visible from one exact spot, but a slightly off-centered tree can be seen from various angles, and the brain finds it more believable. It always seeks the most plausible explanation. One of the key principles of aesthetics is symmetry. Remember the feeling when you first looked through a kaleidoscope. In nature, symmetry is a sign of life. We subconsciously seek it in faces, bodies, and objects. Even newborns are drawn to symmetrical shapes. We tend to find such faces more attractive. However, in art or interior design, full symmetry can feel unnatural. It works well for individual objects, but not for entire scenes. Sometimes symmetry becomes a metaphor, as in the Indian sculpture of Nataraja, the dancing Shiva. Here, symmetry combines with movement to create an image of a cosmic dance. August Rodin was so impressed that he tried to recreate the dance movements, falling into a trance. Understanding the biological principles of perception doesn't diminish the greatness of art. On the contrary, it helps us appreciate it more deeply. Remember the story of David. He believed his parents were imposters. He recognized his father's voice on the phone, but as soon as his father entered the room, David felt it was a copy. The issue was that visual and auditory signals travel along different brain pathways. David's visual path was damaged, while his hearing remained intact. Neurology shows that our self is not a single unit. It consists of many systems working together. When one system shuts down, we still feel like a whole person. It's like a table with several legs. If one is missing, it can still stand. But if several are lost, the balance is broken. For example, people with apotemnophilia believe that a certain limb doesn't belong to them. More than half eventually undergo amputation. When touched on the unwanted body part, their stress levels spike, and MRIs show that the brain's body image area is inactive. Signals come in, but the brain has nowhere to place them. Like an extra chair at the table, the brain accepts oddities in the outside world, but internal mismatches cause stress. In those cases, it chooses the simplest solution to get rid of the extra. Mirror neurons are one of neuroscience's most famous discoveries. They allow us to understand others and be self-aware. In a healthy brain, they're balanced by the frontal lobes, so we don't lose our sense of self. When this balance is disrupted, strange phenomena can occur, like Kuvad syndrome, where men experience pregnancy symptoms along with their partners. Autistic children often confuse I and you. It's hard for them to distinguish themselves from others. Our sense of self arises from the interaction of different brain systems. The left hemisphere strives for a coherent worldview, even if it must ignore facts. The right hemisphere notices inconsistencies and helps us see ourselves from the outside. Sometimes this becomes dramatic. After a stroke, patient Bill didn't realize his left arm was paralyzed. He believed he was clapping with both hands. Ella not only denied her paralysis, but claimed her paralyzed arm belonged to her husband. Some people experience a phantom double, especially in extreme situations. It's an ancient defense mechanism, as if observing yourself from the outside. In Capgras syndrome, a person recognizes their loved ones, but feels no emotional connection and believes they're imposters. In prosopagnosia, it's the opposite. They don't recognize faces, but their heart reacts. In Fragoli syndrome, every person seems to be the same familiar one in disguise. Simple things, recognizing a loved one, feeling joy at a reunion, require many brain systems to work together. If even one fails, our perception of reality collapses. In India, neurologist V's Ramachandran met Yusuf Ali, who was convinced he was dead. He had Codard's syndrome, the delusion of being non-existent. He no longer emotionally responded to the world. Music and faces felt empty. He said, "I'm a ghost. I'm dead, but immortal at the same time." Treatment reduced the symptoms, but the feeling of death remained. Scientists believe that in Codard's syndrome, the brain's connections break down. The person stops feeling both themselves and the world. Everything feels like a dream or death. There's an opposite condition, temporal lobe epilepsy. It can trigger feelings of unity with the universe or a sense of merging with God. This brings us to the key question of consciousness-free will. In the brain, the supramarginal gyrus helps us imagine the future. If it's damaged, a person can't carry out even simple tasks, though they know what they're supposed to do. The desire to act arises in the anterior cingulate cortex. Damage there leads to akinetic mutism, a waking coma. The person understands everything but does nothing. Sometimes the alien hand syndrome occurs, a limb acts on its own. It might grab something faster than you can think. This shows how different conscious and unconscious processes can be. Japanese. Chicken sexers look at a chick and immediately know its sex, but they can't explain how. The same was true for we aircraft spotters. They knew the answer, but not how. Knowledge without awareness. People with amnesia can learn to play tennis, yet each day claim they've never seen the game. The brain remembers, but consciousness does not, and perhaps most troubling are implicit biases. We may not know we have them, yet they affect our perceptions and decisions. Modern psychologists have developed tests to uncover biases we don't even suspect. Some people say, "I have no prejudices," but is that really true? Scientists found a way to check. A person sits at a computer. There are two buttons, right and left. The first task is simple. Press the right button for a positive word, the left for a negative one. Then the rules change. Photos of people of different races or appearances are shown. And here it gets interesting. If a person has hidden biases, their hands reveal it. They press the button faster when a disliked group is paired with a negative word. Another method tracks mouse movement. Sometimes the hand first moves toward dislike, then abruptly changes direction. This means the subconscious reacted. Before the person thought of the correct answer, people may genuinely be unaware of their biases. Even those who believe they're totally fair can find out otherwise through these tests. Why does this matter? It helps us be more honest with ourselves. If we realize we have hidden tendencies, we can try not to let them guide our decisions. After all, you can't fix what you don't know exists. There's an even deeper insight. Most of the brain's work happens unconsciously. The brain is especially sensitive to repeated stimuli. A face you see often becomes more attractive over time, even if you don't remember where you saw it. This is how advertising works. The more often we see a product or person, the more we tend to like them. Also, if someone hears a statement twice, they're more likely to believe it even if it's false. For example, someone hears that gummoss cause cancer. That's not true, but they may avoid such foods for life. Even when shown scientific studies, the old belief may be stronger. Our subconscious is like an invisible puppeteer. It influences our choice of partner, profession, place to live, even our beliefs. And we almost never notice it. On the Wimbledon court, robots are playing. They consume only 300 grams of hydrocarbons but leap like mountain goats. They move with precision and return. Balls flying at 150 kilometers per hour. These are tennis players. When Illuminates lost to Bjorn Borg, he said, "He's like a robot from space. How does a human become such a robot?" It all starts with conscious training. The coach says, "Hold the racket lower," and the player repeats it. Thousands of repetitions. The conscious mind programs the movements. Eventually, they become automatic. The player no longer thinks about holding the racket. The body just knows. Like riding a bike. At first, everything takes effort. Then it becomes instinctive. This automation offers two advantages. First, speed. When a ball flies at 150 kilometers per hour, there's no time to think. Everything must happen reflexively. Second, energy efficiency. When Garry Kasparov played Deep Blue, his brain used just 20 watts. The computer needed thousands of watts and cooling fans. That's because Kasparov didn't calculate, he recognized patterns. This process is the key principle of how the brain works. When faced with a new task, the brain builds a program to solve it. That's what makes us unique. Many animals are intelligent, but only humans can adapt so flexibly. We can learn anything from identifying the sex of chicks to navigating a ship. Every skill is a new brain program. The paradox is, the better we are at something, the less we understand. How we do it. In the past, the study of consciousness followed two paths. Philosophers debated the nature of experience. Psychoanalysts argued about conscious and unconscious, but couldn't test their theories. Today, there's a third path: neuroscience. We study consciousness by observing the brain and its failures. When the self breaks, we begin to understand how it works. It's a way to peer into the essence of what makes us human. If we succeed, humanity will, for the first time in history, be able to look at itself, understand where everything comes from, and uncover the true agent of consciousness. We don't know where this will lead, but it may be the greatest adventure humanity has ever undertaken.